The city's Central Park was bathed in the warm glow of an autumn afternoon. Golden leaves fluttered down, gathering in piles along the walkways where older couples strolled hand in hand and children laughed as they chased each other. Johnny Depp, his signature hat low over his face, sat on a bench near the park's fountain, enjoying the rare peace. It wasn't a press event or a movie premiere that had brought him here, just a quiet afternoon to himself. He had spent so much of his life in the limelight, but moments like this, surrounded by ordinary life, felt grounding. As he adjusted the scarf around his neck, Johnny noticed two young girls standing near the fountain. They were identical twins, maybe 9 or 10 years old, with messy blonde hair tied back with mismatched ribbons. Their coats were thin, worn at the elbows, and their boots were scuffed from heavy use. At first, they seemed to be admiring the fountain's cascading water, their gazes fixed on its rhythmic flow. But as Johnny watched, he realized they weren't admiring it at all, they were staring at the coins glimmering under the surface. One of the girls whispered something to the other, then cautiously leaned over the edge of the fountain. Her fingers barely skimmed the water before she pulled back, shaking her head. Johnny felt a pang in his chest. He had seen desperation before, often hidden behind smiles and polite conversation. But here it was, plain as day, in the hesitant actions of two children. Rising from his seat, Johnny approached them slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel path. "That water's colder than it looks," he said lightly, announcing his presence without startling them. The girls froze, their wide eyes locking onto him. The braver of the two stepped in front of her sister, shielding her like a little guardian. "We weren't gonna steal anything," the older one said quickly, her tone defensive but trembling slightly. Johnny raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, no judgment here," he said with a gentle smile. "Just thought you might be cold standing so close." The younger girl peeked out from behind her sister, clutching a stuffed bear missing one ear. "It's not stealing if it's in the water," she said in a small voice. Johnny crouched down to their level, his expression kind. "You're right, it's just wishes people leave behind. But I'm guessing you've got bigger things on your mind than wishes." The older girl hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "We just needed a little money. For food." Johnny's heart clenched. He glanced at the stuffed bear, the frayed coat, the too thin boots. These weren't children with a mischievous streak, they were just trying to survive. "What's your name?" Johnny asked, keeping his voice soft. "I'm Lila," the older girl said reluctantly. She nudged her sister forward. "This is Chloe." "Nice to meet you both," Johnny said, tipping his hat slightly. "My name's Johnny." Chloe's eyes widened. "Like the actor?" Johnny chuckled. "Exactly like the actor. Though right now, I'm just a guy who likes to spend time at the park." Lila eyed him suspiciously, but Chloe tilted her head, curiosity overcoming her shyness. "Do you really live in those big houses with the swimming pools?" Johnny smiled. "Something like that. But I've learned that what matters most isn't the size of your house, it's the people in it." The comment seemed to land heavily with the girls. Lila shifted uncomfortably, her gaze darting away. "Are you two here alone?" Johnny asked gently. Lila's protective instincts flared. "We're fine. Our mom's working nearby." She said to wait for her. Johnny didn't push, but something in Lila's tone made him doubt her words. "You're tough, huh?" he said, smiling warmly. "Looking out for your sister like that." Lila's shoulders straightened. "Chloe needs me." Johnny nodded, respecting the strength it took for a child to bear such responsibility. "Well, I was just about to grab a bite to eat. You two want to join me?" "My treat." Chloe's eyes lit up, but Lila hesitated. "We're not supposed to take stuff from strangers." "Smart rule," Johnny agreed. "But here's the thing, if I was gonna be a bad guy, do you think I'd be sitting here in a park wearing this silly scarf?" He tugged at the scarf playfully, earning a reluctant smile from Lila. Chloe tugged on her sister's sleeve. Lila, I'm really hungry. Lila sighed, her resolve softening. Okay, she said finally. But just for a little while. Johnny led them to a nearby cafe, where the warm scent of soup and fresh bread greeted them at the door. He ordered a hearty meal for the girls, grilled cheese sandwiches and hot cocoa, and watched as they devoured the food with a mix of hunger and delight. So, Johnny said after a while, leaning back in his chair. Where's home for you two? The girls exchanged a glance. A shelter, Lila admitted quietly. Johnny's heart sank, but he kept his expression neutral. How long have you been there? Since last winter, Chloe said, her voice barely above a whisper. After Dad left. Johnny felt a surge of anger, not at the girls, but at the world that had failed them. Your mom must be working really hard to take care of you, he said, his tone filled with compassion. She is, Lila said firmly. But it's not enough. The shelter's closing soon, and we don't know where we'll go. The words hit Johnny like a blow. He looked at the two small faces across from him, their eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. Well, he said after a pause, his voice steady. You don't need to figure it all out tonight. Let me walk you back to your mom, and maybe we can come up with a plan together. The girls hesitated, but Lila finally nodded. Okay. As they stepped back into the cool evening air, Johnny's mind raced with possibilities. These girls deserved more than the hand life had dealt them, and he was determined to do something about it. The walk back to the shelter was quiet, the only sounds coming from the shuffle of footsteps on the cracked sidewalk. Streetlights flickered above them, casting long shadows that danced with each gust of wind. Johnny walked beside Lila and Chloe, who were holding hands tightly. Though they were small and fragile in appearance, their resilience was evident in every step. The shelter stood at the end of a dimly lit street, a squat, concrete building with bars on its windows. The sign above the entrance read, Hope Haven, though its letters were faded and chipped. Johnny could see other families milling about near the doorway, their faces weary but stoic. The sight reminded him of how often people had underestimated his own strength during the darker chapters of his life. As they entered, the sharp scent of disinfectant mixed with the faint aroma of soup from the communal kitchen. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a kind but tired expression, glanced up from her desk. Back already, girls? She asked, her voice tinged with concern. Lila nodded. We brought Chloe's medicine. The receptionist noticed Johnny trailing behind them and arched an eyebrow. And who's this? Before Johnny could respond, Chloe piped up, her voice chipper despite the circumstances. This is Mr. Johnny. He helped us get the medicine. Johnny smiled gently. Just Johnny, he corrected, tipping his hat. I ran into these two at the park and wanted to make sure they got home safely. The woman's expression softened. Well, that's kind of you. We don't get many visitors like you around here. Johnny nodded, sensing the unspoken subtext. This wasn't a place outsiders often ventured into. He crouched to Chloe's level. Your mom should be here soon, right? Chloe hesitated, glancing at Lila for reassurance. Lila shifted uncomfortably. She's working late, she admitted, her voice quiet. Sometimes she doesn't get back until midnight. The receptionist sighed. Their mom, Lisa, works as a night janitor. It's tough on her, but she's doing her best. Johnny's jaw tightened. He glanced around the shelter, the peeling paint, the rows of cots crammed into a single room, the worn faces of the families sitting together in small, tight groups. It was clear that this place, while providing temporary relief, wasn't a long-term solution. Do you mind if I wait with them until she gets back? Johnny asked the receptionist. She hesitated briefly before nodding. Sure. There's a sitting area over there. She gestured to a corner of the room where a few mismatched chairs surrounded a wobbly table. Johnny led the girls over and sat down, his mind racing. Chloe climbed onto a chair and hugged her stuffed bear tightly, while Lila sat with her arms crossed, her wary eyes watching Johnny carefully. "You don't have to stay," Lila said after a moment, her voice tinged with defiance. "We're fine." "I know you are," Johnny said with a small smile. "But I'm not in any hurry. Besides, I'd like to meet your mom." Chloe brightened at the mention of her mother. "She's the best," she said earnestly. "She makes us pancakes when she's not too tired." Johnny chuckled. "Pancakes, huh? Sounds like a pretty great mom to me." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of raised voices near the front desk. Johnny turned to see a man arguing with the receptionist. His clothes were tattered, and his face was lined with anger and desperation. "We've been on the wait list for weeks," the man shouted. "I got a family out in the car, and we've got nowhere else to go." "I'm sorry," the receptionist replied, her voice strained but calm. "We're full tonight. There's nothing I can do." Johnny felt a lump form in his throat. The shelter wasn't just a haven for Lila and Chloe, it was a lifeline for so many others teetering on the edge. The man stormed out, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and Johnny knew he couldn't just sit by and do nothing. He turned back to the girls. "Do you like it here?" he asked gently. Chloe hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It's better than sleeping in the car." Lila frowned. "It's fine," she said curtly, but her tone suggested otherwise. Johnny leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "What if there was a way to make things better? A place where you and your mom could stay together, where Chloe could get her medicine easily, and where you wouldn't have to worry about waitlists or shelters." Lila's eyes narrowed. "What kind of place?" Johnny smiled. "A safe place. Somewhere that feels like home." Before Lila could respond, the shelter door opened, and a woman walked in, her hair tied back in a loose bun. She wore a worn janitor's uniform, and her hands were red and chapped from scrubbing floors. Her face lit up when she saw the girls. "Mom!" Chloe exclaimed, jumping off her chair and running to her. Lila followed more slowly, her guard still up. Lisa knelt to hug her daughters, then looked up at Johnny with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Who's this?" "I'm Johnny," he said, extending a hand. "I met your daughters at the park earlier and thought I'd wait with them until you got back." Lisa shook his hand, her grip firm but weary. "Thank you," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "It's not easy keeping them safe while working these hours." Johnny nodded, his respect for her growing with every word. "They're incredible kids. You're doing a great job." Lisa smiled faintly, but her eyes betrayed the toll her circumstances had taken. "I'm just trying to get through each day." Johnny hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "Lisa, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I think there's a way to make things easier for you and the girls. If you're willing to let me help." Lisa frowned, her expression cautious. "What kind of help?" "Let's start with a better place to live," Johnny said. "And some support to make sure Chloe gets the care she needs. I know some people who can make that happen." Lisa's eyes widened, and she shook her head. "I don't want charity." "It's not charity," Johnny said firmly. "It's a chance to build something better. For all of you." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Lisa glanced at her daughters, who were watching her with hopeful expressions. Finally, she let out a long breath and nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's talk." As Johnny began outlining his plan, he couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just about helping one family, it was about showing that kindness, when shared, could change lives. The next morning, Johnny arrived at the shelter early, carrying a bag of pastries and a tray of hot coffees. The shelter was already buzzing with activity, families preparing for the day, children laughing despite the hardships, and volunteers bustling about. Lila and Chloe greeted him eagerly, their smiles brighter than they'd been the day before. Lisa, standing off to the side, looked more rested but still cautious. "I hope you like croissants," Johnny said, handing the girls a bag filled with warm pastries. Chloe beamed, clutching the bag to her chest. "Thank you, Mr. Johnny." Lisa approached slowly, her arms crossed. "You didn't have to do that," she said, though her voice lacked reproach. Johnny smiled. "Consider it a small start. There's a lot more we need to figure out today." He gestured toward the corner where the girls had sat the night before. "Mind if we talk?" Lisa nodded, and they sat down. Johnny spread out a folder of papers he'd brought with him, explaining the steps he'd taken overnight. "I reached out to some people I trust," Johnny began. "There's a transitional housing program downtown that offers private apartments to families like yours. They also provide childcare, job training, and medical assistance. I've spoken to the director, and they can get you moved in today." Lisa's eyes widened. "Today? That's too fast. I don't even know if I can afford." Johnny raised a hand, cutting her off gently. "Don't worry about that. I'll cover the first 6 months of rent. After that, the program is designed to help you get back on your feet." Lisa stared at him, her expression a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us." Johnny leaned back, his gaze soft but serious. "Because I know what it's like to feel stuck, to think you don't have a way out. And I've been lucky enough to be in a position where I can help. So why wouldn't I?" Lisa's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Johnny said simply. "Just focus on giving these girls the life they deserve." Chloe, who had been quietly munching on a croissant, looked up. "Does this mean we don't have to sleep on the floor anymore?" Johnny's heart clenched at the innocent question. "That's right," he said with a smile. "You'll have your own beds. Maybe even some new stuffed animals for you and your bear." Chloe grinned, clutching her bear tightly. Lila, sitting next to her, still seemed wary. "What if it doesn't work?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Johnny met her gaze, his tone steady. "It will. And if you ever feel like you're slipping, you let me know. We'll figure it out together, okay?" Lila nodded slowly, her small hand reaching out to touch Chloe's. By noon, the shelter staff had helped pack Lisa's few belongings, and a taxi waited outside to take the family to their new apartment. Johnny had arranged to meet them there, following close behind in his own car. The drive was short, and as Johnny stepped out of his vehicle, he saw Lisa and the girls standing in front of a modest but clean building. The director of the housing program, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Carter, was waiting to greet them. "Welcome," Mrs. Carter said warmly, shaking Lisa's hand. "We've got everything set up for you. Let me show you around." The family followed her inside, their eyes wide as they took in the freshly painted walls and well-lit hallways. When they reached the apartment, Mrs. Carter opened the door with a flourish. The space wasn't large, but it was cozy, a living room with a couch and a small dining table, a kitchen with shiny new appliances, and 2 bedrooms, each with clean beds and warm blankets. "This is all ours?" Chloe asked, her voice filled with wonder. "All yours," Mrs. Carter confirmed. The girls ran to explore their new home, their laughter echoing through the halls. Lisa stood frozen in the doorway, her hand covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Johnny placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're home," he said softly. Lisa turned to him, her voice breaking. "I don't know how we'll ever repay you." Johnny smiled. "You already have. Seeing this moment, that's all I need." Over the next few days, Johnny stayed in touch, helping Lisa navigate the new resources available to her. He arranged for Chloe's medical care at a nearby clinic and connected Lisa with a job training program that offered flexible hours. One afternoon, as he visited the family to check on their progress, Lila approached him with a piece of paper in her hand. "What's this?" Johnny asked, crouching to her level. "It's a thank you card," Lila said shyly. Johnny opened the card, its uneven handwriting and colorful crayon drawings bringing a smile to his face. "Thank you for helping us have a home," the note read. "We'll never forget it." Johnny's throat tightened. He hugged Lila gently, overwhelmed by the sincerity of her gesture. Months passed, and the family began to thrive. Lisa found a steady job as a receptionist, Lila excelled in school, and Chloe's health improved with proper care. The apartment transformed into a true home, filled with warmth, laughter, and the sound of new beginnings. For Johnny, the experience left a lasting impact. It reminded him of the power of kindness, not just in grand gestures, but in simple, human connections. One evening, as he sat in his own home, reflecting on the journey, his phone buzzed with a message from Lisa. "Just wanted to let you know," it read, "Lila won a writing contest at school, and Chloe said her first-grade teacher is the best ever. None of this would have happened without you. Thank you, from all of us." Johnny smiled, his heart full. He leaned back in his chair, knowing that while he couldn't change the world for everyone, he had changed it for one family, and that was enough.